moment Stephon Castle finally snapped. One loss. That was all that stood between the San Antonio Spurs and the edge of elimination. But the biggest story coming out of Game 5 wasn't the final score. It wasn't Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's performance. It wasn't Oklahoma City's commanding position in the series. It was Stephon Castle. Because moments after the final buzzer sounded, the young Spurs star walked into the post-game press conference and said something that instantly sent shockwaves across the NBA. Not because he raised his voice, not because he lost control, but because he finally said what many Spurs fans had been thinking throughout the entire Western Conference Finals. The Thunder, according to Castle, were being allowed to play a completely different brand of basketball, a more physical brand, a more aggressive brand, a brand that San Antonio simply wasn't being allowed to match. Within minutes, clips of his comments were everywhere. Basketball fans couldn't stop talking about it. Some called him brave. Others called him frustrated. Some accused him of making excuses, but the reality was much more complicated than that. Because Stephon Castle wasn't speaking as a player who had disappeared when his team needed him most. He wasn't coming off a terrible shooting night. He wasn't sitting on the bench searching for someone else to blame. He had just gone to war against the defending champion. He had battled for every loose ball, every rebound, every possession, every inch of floor space. And after scoring 24 points in one of the biggest games of his career, he still walked away with a loss. A loss that placed San Antonio one game away from watching their season come to an end. For Castle, the frustration wasn't created in one night. It had been building for weeks, building through every collision at the rim, building through every hard foul, building through every controversial moment that left Spurs players looking at officials in disbelief. The deeper this series went, the more physical it became. Every drive to the basket felt like running through a wall. Every transition opportunity seemed to end with bodies hitting the floor. Every possession felt like a fight. And from Castle's perspective, Oklahoma City seemed to be living on a different set of rules. The comments immediately opened a debate across the basketball world. Was Castle exposing a real issue? Or was this simply the frustration of a young player facing playoff elimination? Fans started pulling up old clips, old replays, old moments from earlier games. Suddenly, situations that many people barely noticed during live action were being examined frame by frame. The internet turned into a courtroom. Every replay became evident. Every foul became an argument. Every missed whistle became another piece of the story. But here's what made the situation impossible to ignore. Stephon Castle isn't known as a complainer. He isn't known for creating drama. In fact, everything about his rise to NBA stardom has been built on tough, hard work, discipline, and an obsession with proving people wrong. That's why his words carried so much weight. Because when a player with that reputation finally reaches a breaking point, people start paying attention. People start asking questions, and people start wondering what happened behind the scenes to push him this far. What exactly had Castle experienced during this playoff run? Why were multiple Spurs players suddenly echoing the same concern? And why did this series begin to feel less like a basketball matchup and more like an all-out war? The answers didn't begin after Game 5. They didn't begin with a press conference, and they definitely didn't begin with a viral social media clip. The real story started much earlier, long before the controversy, long before the accusations, long before Stephon Castle finally decided to speak his mind. And once you see everything that happened leading up to that moment, you may understand why the entire NBA is suddenly talking about him. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from today. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below, and I want your opinion. If you believe Castle had a point, comment 1. If you think he was simply frustrated after the loss, comment 2. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened next took this playoff battle to an entirely different level. The series that turned into a street fight, the warning signs were there from the very beginning. Long before Stephon Castle spoke to reporters, long before fans started debating officiating, long before social media exploded with slow motion replays, this series was already becoming something different, something darker, something far more physical than anyone expected. When the Western Conference Finals tipped off, most analysts focused on the obvious storyline: Shai Gilgeous-Alexander versus Victor Wembanyama, the defending champion Thunder against the rising Spurs, experience against youth. But after just a few possessions, another storyline quietly began to emerge. Oklahoma City wasn't simply trying to beat San Antonio, they were trying to wear them down. Every screen came with extra contact. Every cut through the lane felt crowded. Every drive toward the basket ended with multiple defenders crashing into the play. The Thunder weren't interested in making life difficult. They wanted to make life miserable. And no, Spurs felt that pressure more than Stephon Castle. The young guard entered the series carrying enormous expectation. After winning Rookie of the Year and establishing himself as one of the NBA's fastest rising stars, Castle was suddenly playing on the biggest stage of his career. The Thunder knew exactly who he was, and they treated him accordingly. Whenever Castle touched the ball, defenders immediately swarmed him. When he attacked the rim, Bodies appeared from every direction. When he tried to push the pace in transition, Oklahoma City's defenders were already waiting. Nothing came easy. Nothing came free. And that was exactly how the Thunder wanted it. Their strategy wasn't built around stopping one player. It was built around exhausting an entire team. The deeper the series went, the more obvious it became. Even Victor Wembanyama wasn't immune. The 7-foot superstar constantly found himself surrounded by multiple defenders. Every catch was contested. Every move was challenged. Every possession became a wrestling match. To Oklahoma City's credit, the strategy was effective. The Thunder understood that talent alone wouldn't beat San Antonio. They had to make the Spurs uncomfortable. They had to turn every game into a battle of endurance. And for long stretches, it worked. The pressure forced mistakes. Turnovers began piling up. Possessions became chaotic. Even Castle, known for his composure, started showing signs of frustration. But something interesting happened. Instead of backing down, the Spurs began fighting back. The more physical Oklahoma City became, the more determined San Antonio became to answer. Players started talking. Hard fouls became harder. Small confrontations became more frequent. Every game felt hotter than the one before. The basketball world could sense it. This wasn't a normal playoff series anymore. This was becoming personal. For Castle, the challenge wasn't simply scoring points. It wasn't even about winning games. It was about proving he belonged in this environment. The Thunder were testing him every possession, testing his toughness, testing his patience, testing his leadership. And while some young players would have folded under that pressure, Castle continued attacking again and again and again, even when the collisions got harder, even when the whistles stayed silent, even when frustration started building inside the Spurs locker room. What nobody realized at the time was that the most controversial moment of the entire series was right around the corner. A moment that would ignite the internet, a moment that would leave fans furious, a moment that would completely change the conversation surrounding the Western Conference Final. And at the center of it all was Stephon Castle. The moment everything changed. Every playoff series has a turning point. For the Spurs and Thunder, that moment came in Game 2. The series was already physical. Every possession felt like a battle, and tensions were rising with each game. Then Stephon Castle delivered one of the biggest highlights of the playoffs. Attacking the basket with no fear, Castle exploded toward the rim and threw down a vicious dunk over 7-footer Isaiah Hartenstein. The arena erupted. Commentators went wild. Social media instantly crowned it one of the best dunks of the postseason. For a moment, Castle had completely stolen the spot. But what happened next changed the conversation. A few possessions later, while chasing a loose ball, Castle was pulled down after Hartenstein appeared to grab his hair. The contact was clearly visible on replay, yet officials allowed play to continue without calling a foul. Within minutes, clips of the incident spread across the internet. Fans were stunned. Spurs supporters were furious. Many began asking the same question. How could something so obvious go uncalled during the Western Conference Final? The debate exploded across social media. Some argued that playoff basketball is supposed to be physical. Others believed the officials had crossed the line by ignoring such a visible play. For Castle, the incident became bigger than a single possession. It reinforced a growing feeling that Oklahoma City was being allowed to play with a level of physicality that San Antonio simply wasn't receiving. Despite the controversy, Castle never stopped competing. He kept attacking, kept fighting, kept pushing forward, but the frustration was growing. And the hair pull incident quickly became one of the defining images of the entire series. The problem for the Thunder? That wouldn't be the last controversial moment involving Stephon Castle. The biggest explosion of the series was still to come. When the playoff war boiled over, if Game 2 planted the seeds of controversy, Game 3 turned those tensions into a full-blown conflict. By this point, neither team liked each other. The hard fouls were adding up. The trash talk was getting louder. Every game felt more personal than the last. And Stephon Castle was right in the middle of it all. Early in the second half, Castle found himself racing down the court on a fast break. It looked like another opportunity for the young star to attack the rim and shift momentum back towards San Antonio. Instead, the play became one of the most talked about moments of the series. As Castle elevated toward the basket, Thunder guard AJ Mitchell delivered a hard foul from behind, sending him crashing to the floor. The crowd immediately erupted. Spurs players jumped to their feet, and within seconds, emotions exploded. Devin Vassell was the first to react. Seeing his teammate hit the floor, he rushed directly toward Mitchell. Players from both teams quickly surrounded the scene as tensions threatened to boil over. For a brief moment, it looked like the situation could get completely out of control. Officials rushed in. Players were separated. The arena buzzed with chaos. What made the play so controversial wasn't simply the foul itself. It was the timing. This wasn't the first hard hit Castle had taken in the series. It wasn't the second. It wasn't even the third. To many Spurs players, It felt like another example of Oklahoma City pushing the limits of physicality. And this time, frustration finally spilled into the open. After reviewing the play, officials assessed a flagrant 1 foul and handed out technical fouls following the confrontation. The punishment calmed the situation, but it didn't calm the emotion. Those emotions continued building. For Castle, the message was becoming clear. Every drive to the basket came with a price. Every fast break came with a risk. Every possession felt like a collision waiting to happen. Yet, despite the punishment he was taking, Castle refused to back down. He kept attacking. He kept challenging defenders. And he kept showing why many around the league viewed him as the future face of the Spurs. The problem was that while Castle continued fighting, Oklahoma City continued winning. The Thunder took control of Game 3 and grabbed a 2-1 series lead. On paper, it was simply another playoff victory. But beneath the surface, something much bigger was happening. The series was no longer just about basketball. It had become emotional, personal, and increasingly hostile. What nobody knew at the time was that all of this pressure was shaping Stephon Castle into something new. A player who wasn't just surviving the spotlight, a player who was learning how to lead through it. And to understand why Castle refused to back down, you have to understand the journey that brought him here in the first place. Because his story started long before the NBA, long before playoff bat, long before Oklahoma City. It started with a kid who had spent his entire life proving people wrong, the making of a future star. Long before Stephon Castle was battling the defending champions in the Western Conference Finals, he was just a kid with a dream and something to prove. The spotlight didn't find Castle overnight. He earned it. Growing up in Georgia, Castle quickly established himself as one of the most talented young players in the country. Coaches loved his versatility, scouts admired his maturity, opponents feared his competitiveness, but what separated him from other top prospects wasn't his athleticism. It was his mentality. Even as a teenager, Castle played with an edge. He embraced difficult matchups, he welcomed pressure, and he never seemed afraid of the biggest moment. By the time he reached high school stardom, national attention followed. Recruiting rankings climbed, major college programs lined up for a chance to land him. Eventually, Castle chose UConn. It turned out to be the perfect decision. Instead of chasing statistics, he focused on winning. Instead of worrying about personal recognition, he embraced whatever role the team needed. That approach helped UConn capture a national championship and transformed Castle from a highly regarded recruit into a legitimate NBA prospect. NBA scouts saw everything they wanted: size, athleticism, playmaking, defense, leadership. Most importantly, they saw a player who performed his best when the pressure was highest. That reputation followed him into the NBA draft. When the San Antonio Spurs selected Castle with the 4th overall pick, the vision became obvious. The franchise already had Victor Wembanyama. Now they were adding another young cornerstone, another player capable of helping lead the next era of Spurs basketball. The expectations were enormous. But Castle never looked overwhelmed. His rookie season wasn't perfect. There were mistakes. There were struggles. There were nights when the speed of the NBA looked overwhelming. Yet every challenge seemed to make him better. As the season progressed, his confidence grew. His impact grew. And so did his reputation around the league. By the end of the year, Castle had done something few young players accomplish. He earned the respect of veteran. Coaches trusted him. Teammates relied on him. Opponents took him seriously. Then came the ultimate reward: NBA Rookie of the Year. For many players, that achievement would have been enough. For Castle, it was only the beginning, because entering his second season, he wasn't focused on individual awards anymore. He was focused on winning. He wanted playoff basketball. He wanted meaningful games. He wanted the pressure that comes with competing on the biggest stage. Now he had it. Every lesson from Georgia, every lesson from UConn, every lesson from his rookie season, all of it was being tested against Oklahoma City. And as intense as this playoff battle had become, Castle wasn't backing down, because this was exactly the type of moment he had spent his entire life preparing for. The kid who once dreamed about playing under the brightest lights was finally there. The only question was how far he could take the Spurs before the journey ended. And the answer would begin with the season that transformed him from a promising young player into one of the NBA's most dangerous rising stars. The season that changed everything. Winning Rookie of the Year was only the beginning. The real breakthrough came during Stephon Castle's second season. From the opening months, it was obvious he had taken another step forward. He looked stronger, more confident, and far more comfortable controlling games against elite competition. His scoring improved, his playmaking improved, his leadership improved. Most importantly, his defense became one of the most feared weapons in the league. Night after night, Castle accepted the toughest assignment on the floor. Whether he was facing elite guards, explosive scorers, or all-star wings, he embraced the challenge. That's what separated him from most young players. He didn't avoid pressure. He chased it. Then came the performance that officially announced his arrival. Against Dallas, Castle delivered a historic triple-double: 40 points, 12 rebounds, 12 assists, One of the most memorable games by a young player in Spurs history. The performance instantly changed the conversation around him. Castle was no longer viewed as a promising prospect. He was becoming a star. At the same time, his partnership with Victor Wembanyama continued to grow. The chemistry was obvious. Wembanyama dominated inside. Castle controlled the perimeter. Together, they gave San Antonio one of the brightest futures in basketball. By the time the playoffs arrived, opposing teams were already building defensive game plans specifically to stop Castle. That alone showed how much respect he had earned. The Thunder understood the threat. They knew if Castle found his rhythm, the Spurs became far more dangerous. So Oklahoma City made life difficult. Every drive was contested. Every possession was crowded. Every basket had to be earned. Yet Castle kept fighting, kept producing, kept proving he belonged on the biggest stage. And then came the moment that would shake the entire NBA. One dunk, one highlight, one unforgettable statement against Oklahoma City, a play that instantly became one of the defining moments of the postseason. The dunk that shook the playoffs. Every star needs a signature playoff moment. For Stephon Castle, it came in Game 2. With the Spurs battling the defending champions, Castle received the ball, spotted an opening, and attacked the rim without hesitation. Standing in his way was 7-footer Isaiah Hartenstein. Most players would have avoided the contact. Castle went straight through it. He exploded toward the basket and delivered a massive dunk directly over Hartenstein, instantly bringing the arena to its feet. The crowd erupted. Commentators lost their mind. Social media exploded within minutes. The highlight quickly became one of the most replayed moments of the postseason. But what made the dunk special wasn't just the athleticism. It was the message. Throughout the series, Oklahoma City had tried to overwhelm San Antonio with physicality. That dunk was Castle's response. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't backing down. He was ready to fight. For the Spurs, the play became a symbol of resilience. For Thunder fans, it was a reminder that Castle was becoming a serious problem. The moment also revealed something important about the young guard. The bigger the stage, the better he seemed to play. Pressure didn't scare him. It fueled him. Unfortunately, while Castle was delivering highlights, another issue was quietly hurting San Antonio. As the series continued, Oklahoma City's depth started making the difference, and it was becoming a problem the Spurs could no longer ignore. The advantage San Antonio couldn't overcome. While much of the attention was focused on Stephon Castle, Victor Wembanyama, and the physical battles taking place on the court, another storyline was quietly deciding the series: depth. And Oklahoma City had plenty of it. Through the first few games, the Thunder's bench consistently outperformed San Antonio's second unit. Every time the starters rested, Oklahoma City seemed to find another player capable of making an impact. Alex Caruso brought energy, Jared McCain provided scoring, Cason Wallace delivered defense. The Thunder never seemed to run out of answers. The Spurs, meanwhile, struggled to get the same production from their reserves. That gap slowly became impossible to ignore. Even when Castle delivered big performances, even when Wembanyama controlled stretches of the game, even when San Antonio matched Oklahoma City's intensity, the Thunder's depth kept creating separation. The pressure eventually reached the Spurs locker room. Veteran forward Keldon Johnson became one of the players facing increased scrutiny. His production dropped, and critics began questioning whether he was providing enough support for the team's young stars. The conversation grew louder with every game. Could San Antonio really beat the defending champions if Castle and Wembanyama had to carry such a massive workload? The answer became clear in Game 4. The Spurs finally matched Oklahoma City's physicality and dominated the game from start to finish. They won convincingly and tied the series at 2 games apiece. For a moment, momentum had shifted. Belief returned, the crowd came alive, and it looked like San Antonio might actually take control of the series. But championship teams respond when challenged. The Thunder didn't panic. They adjusted, and heading into Game 5, Oklahoma City was ready to deliver its strongest punch yet. Unfortunately for the Spurs, that punch would leave them 1 loss away from elimination, and it would ultimately lead to the moment that made Stephon Castle a national headline. The breaking point. Game 5 was supposed to be a statement game. Instead, it became the night everything boiled over. The series was tied. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Win, and the Spurs would move 1 step closer to the NBA Finals. Lose, and they would face elimination. From the opening tip, Oklahoma City played with urgency. The Thunder attacked the basket relentlessly, forcing San Antonio to defend every possession at full intensity. Despite the pressure, Stephon Castle continued to fight. He attacked the rim, he created opportunities, he kept the Spurs within striking distance. By the end of the night, he had scored 24 points in one of the toughest environments in basketball. But it wasn't enough. The Thunder pulled away late and secured a crucial victory, taking a 3-2 series lead. For most players, the story would have ended there. A tough loss, a short interview, a focus on Game 6. Castle had something else on his mind. As he walked into the post-game media session, weeks of frustration finally caught up with him. The hard fouls, the controversial no calls, the physical battles, the growing feeling that Oklahoma City was being allowed to play by a different standard. Castle didn't scream. He didn't make excuses. Instead, he calmly explained what he believed had been happening throughout the series. He said the Thunder were allowed to be more physical than the Spurs. He suggested there was a difference in how the game was being called. And instantly, the basketball world reacted. Some fans agreed immediately. Others pushed back, but nobody ignored it. The numbers only added fuel to the debate. Oklahoma City attempted more free throws. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander spent significant time at the line. Meanwhile, Spurs fans pointed to several moments throughout the series where they believed San Antonio didn't receive the same whistle. The discussion exploded across social media. Sports shows debated it, former players weighed in, analysts broke down replays. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, yet what made Castle's comment so powerful wasn't the controversy, it was the credibility behind them. This wasn't a player searching for attention. This was a player who had spent 5 games battling one of the best teams in basketball. A player who had absorbed contact, played through frustration, and still performed at a high level. Whether people agreed with him or not, they respected the fact that he was willing to stand behind his words. For the first time in the series, the spotlight shifted away from the Thunder's victories and focused directly on Stephon Castle. The young star had become the face of the conversation. And now, with Game 6 approaching, all eyes were on him, because the next game wouldn't simply determine the future of the Spurs' season. It would determine how this entire story ended. Would Castle back up his words on the court, or would Oklahoma City close the door on San Antonio's playoff run once and for all? The answer would define not only the series, but perhaps the next chapter of Castle's career. More than a playoff series. No matter how this series ends, one thing has already become clear. Stephon Castle has arrived, not as a promising young player, not as a future star, but as someone ready to carry the weight of expectations, pressure, and criticism on one of basketball's biggest stages. When most people look back at this Western Conference Finals, they'll remember the wins and losses. They'll remember the controversial calls, the hard fouls, the heated moments, the debates about physicality and officiating. But years from now, those details may not be what matters most. What people will remember is how a 21-year-old guard responded when everything seemed stacked against him. They'll remember a player who never stopped competing, a player who kept attacking even after being knocked down, a player who continued fighting even when frustration was building around him. That's what separates good players from future leaders. Anybody can stay confident when things are easy. Anybody can smile when they're winning. The real test comes when adversity shows up. The real test comes when things don't go your way. And throughout this series, Castle passed that test. Was he frustrated? Absolutely. Was he emotional? Of course. But that's what happens when someone cares deeply about winning. The important thing is that he never stopped competing. For the Spurs, this series may ultimately become one of the most valuable experiences of their young core's development. Victor Wembanyama gained another level of playoff experience. Castle learned what it feels like to be targeted by an elite championship defense. The entire roster learned how small the margin is between winning and losing at the highest level. Those lessons cannot be taught. They have to be lived. And championship teams are often built through moments exactly like these. The Thunder understand that reality better than anyone. Before they became champions, they experienced heartbreak. Before they learned how to win, they learned how to lose. That's part of the journey. The Spurs may not be where they want to be today, but the future remains incredibly bright. Castle and Wembanyama have already shown flashes of a partnership that could dominate the league for years. One brings elite size, the other brings elite versatility. Both bring competitiveness. Both bring hunger, and perhaps most importantly, both seem willing to embrace the pressure that comes with greatness. As for Stephon Castle, his biggest victory may have nothing to do with a box score. He proved he belonged. He proved he isn't afraid of the spotlight. And he proved that when the stakes are highest, he's willing to stand up for himself, his teammates, and what he believes. That's the kind of mentality organizations spend years searching for. Whether you agreed with his comments or disagreed with them, one thing is impossible to deny. The basketball world is paying attention now, and this story is only beginning. The next chapter of Stephon Castle's career could be even bigger than the last. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest NBA news, stories, and playoff drama. And before you go, let me know your final verdict in the comment. Type 1 if you believe Castle was right about the physicality throughout the series. Type 2 if you think Oklahoma City simply played tougher basketball. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.